When JIMIN walked into a small BUSAN restaurant on a cold Tuesday night, he never imagined he'd become the target of the most brutal public humiliation caught on camera. The beloved K-pop star, known worldwide for his kindness and humility, was treated like a common nobody by a furious manager who had no idea who she was destroying. What started as a quiet dinner turned into a viral nightmare that would expose the darkest side of human nature. But JIMIN's response, it wasn't what anyone expected, and it changed everything. Oh, and before we dive into this incredible story, tell us what's your favorite JIMIN performance of all time. Let us know in the comments. It was a cold Tuesday evening in November in Busan. Golden leaves danced through the streets as the city prepared for another ordinary day. But for JIMIN, this day would be anything but ordinary. The artist walked discreetly down Hongdae Road, wearing a simple coat and a beanie pulled low over his eyes. It wasn't the first time he tried to go unnoticed. In fact, JIMIN had always preferred simplicity over ostentation, while other celebrities paraded around in luxury cars and designer clothes. He chose anonymity. That afternoon, after an exhausting photo shoot for an independent project, JIMIN decided to stop at a small Italian restaurant downtown, Bella Vista, a place that seemed welcoming with warm yellow lights and the aroma of garlic and basil floating in the air. The establishment wasn't the most elegant. The chairs had worn upholstery, some tables wobbled slightly, and the decor mixed old family photos with dusty artificial plants. It was exactly the kind of place JIMIN loved, authentic, unpretentious, where he could eat in peace. Upon entering, he noticed the restaurant was almost empty. Only 2 tables were occupied, one by an elderly couple quietly arguing about bills, and another by a solitary man reading a newspaper while absent-mindedly stirring his soup. The waitress, a young woman about 20 years old named Sophia, looked at JIMIN with a neutral expression. She didn't recognize him, or if she did, she didn't show it. He was just another ordinary customer, perhaps a bit underdressed for that neighborhood. "Table for one?" Sophia asked without much enthusiasm. "Please," JIMIN replied with a gentle smile. She led him to a small table in the corner near the kitchen. It wasn't the best location, noisy with strong frying smells and the constant back and forth of staff members. But JIMIN didn't complain. He never complained. 3 days after the incident, Diana Rini sat alone in her empty restaurant. The lights were on, the tables were set, but no customers had shown up since Tuesday morning. The boycott had been swift and devastating. Reservations were canceled. Suppliers began questioning payments. Even the employees were quitting, embarrassed to be associated with the establishment. Sophia was the last to leave, placing her uniform folded on the counter along with a respectful resignation letter. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rini," she had said, "but I can no longer work in a place that has become a symbol of intolerance." Diana opened her laptop and saw the headlines that kept appearing. JIMIN responds to restaurant humiliation with grace. The power of dignity. How one idol's response changed everything. But the story had taken a turn she hadn't expected. Instead of using his global influence to destroy Bella Vista, JIMIN had done something completely different. In an interview on a late-night talk show, he had spoken about the power of forgiveness and second chances. "We all make mistakes," he told an audience that gave him a standing ovation. The lady at the restaurant was clearly going through a difficult time. "It's not my role to judge her. It's my role to show that we can choose to respond to cruelty with kindness." And then came the surprise no one expected. "Actually," JIMIN continued, "I'd like to do something for Bella Vista. They have employees who depend on those jobs. People like Sophia, who was kind to me when no one else was." Diana watched in disbelief as JIMIN announced he would make a donation to help laid-off employees find new jobs, and that he would use his foundation to promote workshops on empathy and respect in customer service. "Revenge is never the answer," he said. looking directly at the camera. "Education and compassion are..." Diana's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Rini? This is Marcus Thompson from the JIMIN Foundation. Mr. Park would like to speak with you." Diana almost dropped the phone. He wants to talk to me?" "Yes. He believes everyone deserves a second chance. Could you meet us tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. at the foundation office?" Diana hung up, stunned. JIMIN, the man she had publicly humiliated, was offering help. He wasn't seeking revenge or trying to destroy her further. He was offering redemption. That night, Diana couldn't sleep. She replayed every moment of the incident, every cruel word she had said, every look of contempt she had given, and she realized that JIMIN had won in the most devastating way possible with kindness. He hadn't destroyed her restaurant through revenge. He had let her own actions speak for themselves. And now, when she was at rock bottom, he was extending his hand to help her up. It was the most complete and silent revenge anyone could have, not through cruelty, but through demonstrating that there was a better way to live. A way that Diana was about to learn, if she had enough courage to accept the lesson. The real battle hadn't been between her and JIMIN. It had been between two types of humanity, one that destroys and another that builds, and she was about to discover which side she really wanted to be on. Diana arrived at the JIMIN Foundation office at the appointed time, her hands trembling as she held an apology letter she had rewritten dozens of times during the night. The office was simple, without ostentation, exactly as she should have expected. JIMIN received her personally, wearing jeans and a basic t-shirt, the same type of clothing she had judged inappropriate days before. "Mrs. Rini," he said, extending his hand with a genuine smile. "Thank you for coming." Diana almost collapsed right there. His kindness, after everything that had happened, was almost unbearable. "Mr. Park," she began, but he gently interrupted her. "Please, have a seat. I brought coffee. I hope you like it." They sat in comfortable armchairs, and Diana noticed there were no cameras, no reporters, no assistants. It was just a conversation between two people. "I wrote a letter," Diana said, handing over the crumpled paper. "But words seem so inadequate." JIMIN read the letter in silence, his expressions changing subtly. When he finished, he folded it carefully. "You know," he said softly, "I spent a lot of time thinking about what happened, and I realized you taught me something important." Diana looked at him, confused. "I taught you?" "Yes. You reminded me how easy it is to forget where we came from, how easy it is to judge people when we're in positions of power." He paused. "I've been like you, Diana. May I call you Diana?" She nodded, surprised by the respectful informality. "When I started becoming successful," JIMIN continued, "there were moments when I felt superior, moments when I judged people by appearance or status. The difference is, I learned about loss and humility too early for that to last very long." Diana felt tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this. My restaurant is bankrupt. My employees lost their jobs. My reputation." "Reputations can be rebuilt," JIMIN interrupted her. "But only if the change is genuine. The question is, do you really want to change, or do you just want the consequences to disappear?" The question hit Diana like a punch. She thought about it for a long moment. "I want to change," she said finally. "I don't want to be the person who humiliates others to feel important anymore. I don't want my daughter to see that video when she grows up and feel ashamed of me." JIMIN smiled. "Then let's work together." In the following months, something extraordinary happened. Diana closed Bella Vista, but not forever. With help from JIMIN's foundation, she transformed it into something completely different. A community center that offered meals for those who could afford it, and free meals for those who needed them. Sophia returned as manager, and Diana worked as a volunteer, serving food and learning about true humility. She participated in empathy workshops, went to therapy to understand her insecurities, and slowly rebuilt not just her reputation but her soul. The viral video continued circulating, but now it was accompanied by Diana's redemption story. JIMIN never boasted about his generosity, never used the situation for personal promotion. He simply continued being who he had always been, a man who believed in the transformative power of kindness. Years later, when asked about that terrible night, Diana always said the same thing. JIMIN didn't destroy me when he could have done so easily. Instead, he taught me that true strength lies in lifting others up, not tearing them down. And so, the story that began with cruelty ended with redemption, not because evil was punished, but because good chose to teach instead of take revenge. Because sometimes, the deepest transformation happens when someone shows us, through their actions, who we could be if we chose to be better. JIMIN's silent revenge was complete. He transformed an enemy into an ally, a moment of hate into a lesson of love, a story of humiliation into a legend of redemption. Months passed, and the transformation of Bella Vista became a quiet inspiration across Busan. News outlets began covering not only the viral video that had shocked the internet, but also the unexpected story of healing that followed. Volunteers, once strangers, started joining Diana and Sophia in the restaurant-turned-community hub. Local schools sent students on field trips to learn about empathy, compassion, and second chances. Diana no longer wore heels or designer dresses to the kitchen. She wore an apron and a hairnet, and her hands bore the proof of honest work, rough palms from chopping vegetables, lines around her eyes from long hours, but eyes that now held warmth instead of judgment. The change wasn't cosmetic, it was sincere. Every now and then, a customer would enter, pause by the door, and recognize her. Some took photos, some asked questions. Most, however, simply sat down and experienced what Bella Vista had become. A place where all were welcome, where no one was judged by how much they spent or what they wore, and where a quiet legacy of kindness lived in every plate served. JIMIN never returned to the restaurant, not out of avoidance, but because he believed the story now belonged to others. In interviews, he mentioned it only in passing, never naming the restaurant or its manager. "What matters isn't what happened to me," he would say, "but what happened after." He continued his work with the foundation, often behind the scenes, supporting community centers, mental health programs, and initiatives to teach respectful service practices across Korea and beyond. Fans who followed his career noticed a new depth in his art lyrics that spoke more intimately of struggle and compassion, performances that resonated with quiet strength. Meanwhile, Diana's daughter, Mina, who had once been too young to understand what had unfolded, grew up hearing the story not as a scandal, but as a lesson. When she asked her mother what happened that night, Diana didn't flinch. "I was cruel," she told her, "but I was shown mercy, and that mercy changed me." Years later, Mina would become a social worker, often telling people that her mother's mistakes helped shape her own purpose. Not in shame, but in redemption. The building that once housed the original Bella Vista became a symbol, not of scandal, but of change. Tourists sometimes stopped by, hoping to catch a glimpse of the place where JIMIN had made a quiet stand for dignity. But most of the time, the people who came were just locals, tired parents, job seekers, lonely elders looking for a warm meal and a place where they wouldn't be judged. One rainy afternoon, a young man entered Bella Vista, drenched and silent. Diana offered him a towel and a bowl of soup. He thanked her with a weary voice and sat at the corner table, the same one where JIMIN had once read his book, in peace. As Diana cleared dishes nearby, The man looked up and said, "I don't have money. I just needed somewhere to sit for a bit." She smiled gently. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. The soup is on us." And with those words, the story came full circle, not with headlines or hashtags, but with one quiet act of kindness offered to a stranger. Because in the end, the most powerful legacy wasn't the humiliation or the fame. It was the choice to respond with grace when no one would have blamed someone for turning away. And that choice, made by one man with a quiet voice and a deep soul, had changed not just a restaurant, but lives. JIMIN's silent act had echoed farther than any song or speech could have, and in that small corner of Busan, it was still echoing. "You said, continue story, and just give narration only." ChatGPT said, "Years later, the story of Bella Vista became the subject of a best-selling book titled A Table for One: How Kindness Changed Everything." The author was a young journalist who had been one of the first to report on the incident, drawn not just by the scandal, but by what followed something far rarer: redemption. In the book's foreword, the journalist wrote, "This is not a story about a celebrity. It is a story about a moment when the world held its breath and watched a man choose dignity over retaliation, and how that one decision rippled outward in quiet, life-altering ways." JIMIN never claimed credit. When asked about the book, he simply said, "I'm glad something good came from it. That's all I ever hoped for." In Busan, Bella Vista thrived not as a trendy restaurant but as a refuge. Its walls were painted with soft, calming colors. The photos that once lined them had been replaced with drawings from children in the community, thank you letters from those who had been helped, and quotes about compassion in many languages. One framed letter hung beside the kitchen door, Diana's original handwritten apology, preserved as a reminder. Sophia, now in her late 20s, became a leader in local hospitality reform. She led seminars across Korea on respectful service, partnering with the JIMIN Foundation to teach restaurant owners how to lead with integrity. She never forgot the 100,000 won note he gave her, not because of its value, but because of what it represented being seen when it mattered most. Diana continued to work quietly. She no longer managed. She served. She found peace not in giving orders, but in listening. She spent her free time helping other business owners who had stumbled in their own paths, always sharing her story not with shame, but with honesty. Her name had once been a symbol of arrogance. Now, it was whispered in the community with a strange kind of respect, not for who she had been, but for who she had dared to become. As for JIMIN, the years brought more accolades, world tours, music that moved millions. But when asked in interviews about defining moments in his life, he often recalled a quiet night in Busan, in a restaurant few people knew before the internet lit it on fire. "I was tired. I just wanted to eat," he would say. "But that night reminded me why I make music. Because music, like kindness, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be there, to fill a space when someone needs it." He never returned to Bella Vista, not physically, but his presence remained. The corner table was never officially marked, but regulars knew. It was the seat no one took unless they truly needed a place to breathe. Sometimes a homeless man, sometimes a struggling student, sometimes someone who just had a hard day. They sat there and they were fed, no questions asked. And in that simple act, again and again, the legacy of that night lived on, not in the memory of the humiliation, but in the quiet revolution that followed it. A revolution sparked not by anger, but by a man sitting alone, reading a book, and choosing, in the face of cruelty, to remain kind. As more time passed, Bella Vista became more than just a restaurant or a community center. It became a movement. People from all over South Korea, and eventually other countries, visited not for the food alone, but for the message. It was no longer simply a place where meals were served, but a sanctuary where every visitor was reminded that human dignity had no price tag. Universities began using the story in their ethics and hospitality courses. Professors would reference it during lectures on leadership, empathy, and the invisible cost of public humiliation. The incident with JIMIN became a case study, not for the mistake itself, but for the unexpected and profound way it was resolved. Diana, once an anonymous figure in local business, now spoke on panels about the power of remorse, owning one's actions, and rebuilding with sincerity. She always began by saying, "I am not proud of who I was, but I am proud of what I chose to become after." JIMIN, despite being the catalyst for all of it, remained distant from the spotlight of the story. He was often invited to speak or appear in documentaries about the event, but he always declined. "It's not my story," he would say. "It belongs to everyone who decided to be better after watching it unfold." Privately, however, he stayed connected. Each year, on the anniversary of the night he walked into Bella Vista, a quiet donation would arrive at the community center. No note, no signature, just a familiar contribution that helped fund meals, workshops, or renovations. Sophia would smile when the donation cleared and say to the volunteers, he remembered, one winter, a young trainee from a struggling K-pop company wandered into Bella Vista unnoticed. His company had just dropped him. He had no money, no prospects, and no family nearby. He ordered nothing and sat quietly, staring at the steam rising from the cups on other tables. Diana noticed. She approached, gently placing a tray of rice, soup, and kimchi in front of him. "I didn't order," he said. "You don't have to," she replied softly. "You just have to be hungry." He ate in silence, slowly, gratefully. When he finished, he stood by the door for a long moment, then bowed deeply. "Thank you. I needed this more than you know." Diana nodded, watching him go. She didn't know his name, but she recognized the look in his eyes, the same look JIMIN had that night. Not defeat, but exhaustion. The quiet, heavy kind that comes from being made to feel invisible. And just like that, the cycle continued, not of pain, but of healing. Every act of kindness that followed traced itself back to that cold Tuesday night in Busan, when one person could have chosen pride, but instead chose compassion. Bella Vista no longer needed signs or slogans. Its story was etched into the atmosphere, felt in every bowl served and every welcome offered. And though JIMIN would never speak of it publicly again, he knew the moment had outgrown him. What he had given that night was not just dignity, it was momentum. Momentum for a world just a little softer, a little more patient, and a little more willing to believe that even in a place of judgment and cruelty, grace could sit quietly in the corner and change everything. Years slipped quietly by, and Bella Vista settled into its rhythm not of fame or viral attention, but of consistent, unseen grace. It became a place where the forgotten were remembered, where the weary paused, and where no one needed to prove their worth before receiving kindness. One autumn morning, a local high school class arrived at the center as part of a community engagement program. Among the group was a boy who had recently lost his father. His teachers described him as withdrawn, slow to speak, and hesitant to trust others. During the visit, the students were asked to help prepare and serve food. The boy, reluctant at first, found himself quietly slicing vegetables alongside Diana. She didn't ask questions. She just showed him how to hold the knife safely, how to chop with rhythm. Hours passed without a single mention of his sorrow. But when he left that day, his eyes were softer, his shoulders less tight. A week later, he returned on his own to volunteer. He didn't come for credit. He came for peace. And so it was, over and over, that Bella Vista became less of a building and more of a heartbeat, a quiet presence pulsing gently in a corner of Busan. Diana, now older and slower on her feet, still showed up every morning before the doors opened. She would light a small candle in the back, a personal ritual, not tied to religion but to remembrance, a moment to thank the universe for allowing her to fall hard and then rise in a better form. She often thought of JIMIN during these moments, though they had never spoken again after that day at his foundation's office. She didn't need to. He had already given her everything. Not money, not forgiveness, but a mirror. And what she had chosen to do with her reflection became her true legacy. Sophia, now a mother of two, still managed Bella Vista with patience and precision. She had added bookshelves to the corners filled with donated stories in many languages. She said people ate better when they read while chewing, that the heart digested words the way the body digested food. The JIMIN table, as it was now affectionately known, remained untouched by official label or plaque. Everyone knew which one it was. It faced the window, slightly tilted to catch the morning sun. Sometimes it sat empty, preserved in silent reverence. Other times, someone sat there unknowingly, a tired grandmother, a student with tear-streaked cheeks, a delivery driver escaping the rain. They never knew the full history of the table, only that something about it felt safe. And every once in a while, someone would recognize it. They'd sit down slowly, touch the worn edge with reverence, and whisper something under their breath. Not a name, just a thank you. As the world outside shifted with trends and technologies, Bella Vista remained rooted proof that not all lessons fade with time. Some, like the story of JIMIN's quiet stand, deepen. They burrow into the culture, passed on not through headlines, but through example. Children who once came to eat now brought their own children to serve. Those who were helped became helpers. The legacy grew quietly, like vines around a home, not loud, but impossible to ignore. And JIMIN? He continued his journey, albums, concerts, moments of public celebration. But privately, his foundation expanded into areas few celebrities dared to tread. Conflict zones, underserved neighborhoods, and mental health clinics where silence weighed heavy. When asked why he chose such difficult places, he answered simply, "Because kindness should go where it's needed most, not where it's easiest to give." In time, a statue was commissioned, not of JIMIN, but of a table with a single chair, placed in a quiet park near Bella Vista. There was no inscription, no sponsor, just a small brass plate that read, "For those who choose grace." On sunny days, people sat there and reflected. On rainy ones, someone always seemed to leave an umbrella nearby. And so, without fanfare or finality, the story continued not as a lesson, but as a way of being. Not bound to one night, or one man, or one restaurant, but carried on in the quiet choices people made each day. To listen, to pause, to serve, to forgive. Because in a world that often asked for noise, one person's silence had echoed loud enough to change it. Years later, when people spoke of Bella Vista, they no longer mentioned the scandal. Not because it was forgotten, but because it had become only the prologue to something far greater. The restaurant, once the setting of judgment and shame, had transformed into a symbol of quiet redemption, a place that proved people could change, that second chances weren't just possible, but powerful. Diana Rini, now gray-haired and stooped with age, remained part of its daily rhythm. She no longer needed to explain her story. The walls of Bella Vista told it without words. The lives that passed through, fed, welcomed, respected, became her testament. She had once been known for cruelty. Now, she was known for kindness. It didn't erase the past, but it transformed its meaning. One evening, just after closing time, Diana sat alone at the JIMIN table. She hadn't done that in years. The sun had set, and the room glowed with soft lamps. A gentle breeze carried the smell of basil and bread through the open window. She reached into her apron and pulled out a small, worn envelope, a letter she had written but never sent. "Dear Jimin," it began. She had written it the year the foundation opened its third community center, dedicated to serving youth with anxiety and depression. She had followed every milestone from afar, always in gratitude, always in awe. The letter wasn't full of apology anymore. That chapter had long been closed. It was full of thanks for the mirror he had offered her, for the silence he had left her in, and for the dignity he gave her when she had deserved none. Diana didn't mail the letter. She simply placed it on the table, underneath a small stone, a quiet offering to the moment that had saved her life. Outside, the city of Busan buzzed and shimmered in the distance. The world had moved on. Trends faded, headlines were replaced, and even viral stories were buried under newer ones. But inside Bella Vista, the story endured. Not as a memory, but as a presence woven into every corner, every plate, every moment of patience given to someone who just needed a place to sit and be. In another part of the city, Jimin sat backstage after a sold-out concert. The crowd had roared minutes earlier, but now there was only quiet. He scrolled through a few messages, then paused at one from his foundation director. A photo, the JIMIN table, a letter resting on it, no caption. He stared at it for a long time. Then he smiled. Not the kind of smile for cameras or fans, but the kind you give when you know something beautiful has ended the right way. He locked his phone and closed his eyes, listening to the distant sound of waves from the coast. In that moment, he felt no need to go back, no need for closure. The world had already written the ending he had hoped for, not in his name, but in the actions of others. The final chapter wasn't his to write. It belonged to everyone who, after seeing that night, had chosen to be softer, to be slower, to be better. And so, the story closed not with applause, but with a whisper. A chair at a corner table. A stranger offered a meal without question. A life changed, not by force but by grace. And that was enough.